Hi guys, we're here for week 2 of our lecture on classes. So last week I talked about methods, and this week I'm going to talk about instance variables and constructors. And we're going to see that constructors are similar to methods, so it's going to kind of build on what you learned last week. So to start off, just going to go through some main points with this little presentation. Then I'm going to go through an example with you, which I think will be even more helpful. So first of all, instance or class variables, those are the two names that we give them, are basically just variables that are needed by the class, and they should always be declared as private. And we'll see an example of that in a minute. Constructors, the other thing we're going to talk about, and constructors are a block of code that initializes the newly created object, and it resembles an instance method in Java, but it's not a method and it doesn't have a return type. So again, this kind of is just basically talking like they're similar to methods, but they do have some differences. So what does a constructor do? So it's basically going to initialize the instance variables, and that means it's going to give them initial values. So it would give a starting value to that variable. The main things to remember when you are going to write your constructor is that they would have the same name as the class, and they do not return anything. Okay, so those are some of your main points, and I'm going to jump out of this and jump into an example because I think that's going to definitely be more helpful to you. But we're going to go back to when we did in class together, we wrote that class ball. So we're going to go back and re-look at that again. Okay, so for your assignments this week, you're going to be asked to declare your instance variables, or sometimes they're referred to as class variables. And then you're going to be asked to write a couple, 2 to 3, maybe even 4 different constructors for the class. So just to start with the instance variables, you're going to be given the name and type of the instance variables. Your job is to declare them, very similar to what I have here on the screen. So I have 3 variables, one called color, one called texture, and one called size. And each of these 3 variables have a type, string, double. So you might be asked to do an integer, a double, string. Those are going to be your common types of variables. The only thing that's different than when you declare a variable in other situations is that you're going to put the word private in front of it, because class variables or instance variables are private. So you're going to have private string color, private string texture, private double size. So those would be declaring my instance variables. Notice that I do that right at the top of the class before I do anything else. So right underneath public class, I do the declaration of the variables right there. The next thing are my constructors. And you can have a few different constructors. So as I talked about before, constructors, their purpose is to give these variables that we just created initial values. My first constructor here is what I would call a default constructor. And a default constructor has basically no parameters. So this right here that I have highlighted, that's a constructor. It's public. It has the same name as the class. So our class's name was ball. My constructor's name is going to be ball. And then we have our parentheses after it. And you can either have things in those or not, but a default won't have anything in the parentheses. It starts with a curly bracket. It ends with a curly bracket, just like a method would. And inside of it, you're going to set values for our instance variables or our class variables. So in this case, I said, okay, we're going to say the color is red, the texture is smooth, and size is 5.0. I can also create a constructor that has parameters in it. So this constructor here still notices the same public ball, same name as the class, so that does not change. It's always going to look like that. But this time I have parameters. So I have string C, string T, double S. So I'm going to set my variable color to the C. I'm going to set my variable texture to the T and size to S. We could also have a constructor that maybe lets the user have two. So there's two things in the parameters and you set the other. So let me just show you one more. So public ball, let's say I'm going to let the user set the color and the texture, and that's it. So in this constructor, I would say that color equals C and texture equals T, but I'm going to set the size. So size equals, say, 8. Okay, so I let the user take care of the color and the texture, but I, as the writer of this class, go ahead and pick the value for size. So I can write as many constructors as I want, depending on how many variables I have. I could have it with one thing in the parameter, two things, three things, nothing. And in your assignments this week, it's going to specify that it wants, two constructors or three constructors, and it's going to specify what should be in the parameters for each one. And then what value would give the variable that doesn't have anything in the parameters. So the other thing that they ask you to do in the assignment to test it is to actually create some objects based on these. And you don't have to. You can go ahead, once you've written your class, you can go ahead and hit submit and it will run the tests for you to check to see that it is working properly. But if you wanted to be able to test it on your own, you would have a new class. So you would go into your main class, but I'm going to go ahead and create a new one because I'm in Eclipse right now. So we'll just call this main test. And you're going to notice that in the main class, we are still going to have our public static void main like we always do. And I want to create some objects, and we're going to work a little bit more with objects next week, but I want to create some objects that go with this class. So when I create an object, the first thing I do is type the name of the class that I want to create the object for, which our class was called, it was called ball. And I'm going to call this one OBJ1. So I just chose to name it OBJ1 equals new ball, and I'm not going to put anything in the parentheses. And I'm going to create another one, OBJ2 equals new ball, and then I'm going to say red bumpy in 4. And then I'm going to do one more. And this time I'm going to say green and smooth. So the objects I created all align with the constructors that I made. So this first one, OBJ1, where I don't put anything in the parentheses, basically means that it's going into your code and it's reading the constructor that doesn't have anything in the parentheses. So it's automatically going to create a ball that's red, smooth, and has a size of 5. In my second one here, OBJ2, that's going to go and read the constructor that goes with, that has 3 things in it. So if I go back, I'm looking for the constructor that has this one here that's looking for a string with a color, a string with a texture, and a size that's a double. And it would set the color to be, what was it, red, the texture to be bumpy, and the size to be 4. So what I'm doing is when you create the objects, you're actually sending the information in to create that exact ball. What ball am I creating? And it's reading the constructor that goes with it. The third one, the third example I have here where I only send it green and smooth, then it would go down and it would read that third constructor I created that looks for a string for the color and a string for the texture, and then it automatically assigns a size of 8. So these objects are how I can test the constructors that I write, but your constructors are going to be in the ball class. That is just a quick brief demo on constructors for you to get started. Maybe later in the week I will go through one of the labs with you to help you out if you're still struggling. Have a good week.